Mathilde Do Chi is an international food law consultant. She has a rich background spanning private and public sectors, from law firms to the United Nations, and she's armed with diverse insights to tackle legal and policy changes. She's passionate about combating climate change and promoting health, animal-free eating. Mathilde has been driving force in veganism since 2020. She's the VP of Regulatory Affairs for the Vegan World Alliance and the Vegan Society of Canada, and she's Chief Compliance Officer for BVEG International. She describes herself as on a mission to help launch plant-friendly and planet-friendly animal-free food through vegan food law, her company and consulting company. Today I'm with Mathilde Do Chi. Mathilde is an international food law consultant, and she's got a rich background spanning private and public sectors in the area of law and veganism. I will have introduced you ahead of time with some more detail, but great to have you here today. And maybe we can just start out by having you tell the people that are listening a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got to be there.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks so much for the invite. So what I do on a daily basis is I help companies navigate the applicable food regulatory framework. And I specialize in food innovation slash alternative proteins. So alternative proteins is everything ranging from plant-based, algae, microorganisms, fermentation, derived, and cellular agriculture. And I make sure that the company, when they are developing a product, they are also aware of regulatory limitation, because sometimes you can have a product that ticks all the boxes, but if you are not careful enough to check how you can have this product authorized, it can actually backfire at you, and also you have to question your entire business plan.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get into that. There's a lot of detail, and of course every country and jurisdiction is different. So I'm interested to learn more about how to navigate that, and also probably you've seen some real mistakes happen also at times. It might be interesting to talk about. But how did you get into this? What about your background and what led you to? It's a pretty unique field. I mean, of course, it's very timely now in the food ecosystem, but certainly 10 years ago, maybe not as timely. So how did you come to be at where you're doing?
So I grew up in a multicultural cultural household, and when you are the second or the third generation, when you don't speak the language, what your parents or grandparents will at least teach you is how to cook. So I was always I was aware from a very young age that the type of food that you eat depends on numerous factors like religion, culture, localization as well. And when I was 20, I was diagnosed with gluten, egg white, and milk intolerance. So I had to change my diet. And it was back in 2015. And at the time, I heard about veganism. So I didn't become vegan right away. It took me a couple of years, 5 years. But I got interested in eating new, in brackets, sources of food. And then this is when I realized that the impact of the food system had on the greenhouse gas emissions was enormous. And one way to mitigate this was to change the food system. And this is when I come across alternative proteins, so plant-based, fermentation derived, and cell ag. And I did do a master's in food law in Italy, in Rome, and I even interned at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, the FAO. But back then I was mainly doing school feeding programs, and I was focusing on procurement. And actually, I had to teach myself everything related to alternative proteins. And then I got a job at a multinational specialized in food ingredients called ADM. I was in charge of compliance check. I was mainly doing plant-based, but then I was seeing at the same time that the venture arm of the company was investing heavily in cell-based meat and fermentation-derived products. And after a year and a half working there, I decided to take the leap of faith, and I became an independent food law consultant.
Interesting, great. And if you study law in this area, maybe can you tell us a little bit about what sorts of topics you cover. I mean, I think a lot of people are familiar with how one prepares for criminal law or these types of areas, but law typically requires a lot of precedent of study, right? And so what is the course of study in that area like? Maybe 10 years ago when you did, or 15 years ago when you were doing it, must be different now.
So for food law specifically, it's everything like regulating the like food trade. So
Mhm,
it's goes from international trade rules, so the rules of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in terms of also like customs,
mhm,
how high or how low would you, as a country, tax a certain product. It also like tackles food safety matters to
mhm,
make sure that if you have, for instance, like salmonella, it's like below a level that is deemed safe.
mhm,
And I think most of the people, when I mention food law, they will think automatically about food labeling. So how do
mhm.
you name a certain product? What are the nutritionals? What type of claims you can
That's
make?
what I thought about when I exactly. Yeah.
And it's also a little bit of lobbying in the sense that the way regulations are written right now don't necessarily match like the concerns or the challenges of the industry.
Mhm,
And the law is like always lagging behind. Like innovation
mhm,
is way ahead. And it's all about questioning how it's written. And also, this is why I do like international food law. So I tackle like several like jurisdictions. So the European one with the EU, Switzerland, and UK,
mhm,
North America, Canada, and US, the Gulf region, Australia, New Zealand, and then Singapore. And you have some specificities that are also tied to food security concerns. Like for
mhm,
instance, I don't know if you have heard, but like Singapore is like uh, very much loved by startups because you can get approval like really quick. It's
mhm,
also because the country is like food insecure.
mhm,
They import up to 90% of their food, and
mhm.
by 2030, they want to be able to produce locally at least 30% of their needs in
Yeah.
food.
Yeah. So they're really investing heavily in local, like vertical ag and all the rest of these techniques and things like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, and I presume like then, so in that role, you advise, it's not the sort of thing where you would have to be kind of certified to practice that law in a particular country. You're more advising on the interpretation of local laws and things like this so that companies don't run awry of, you know, doing the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I do like the checkup before, a company has to go in front of a court.
Mhm.
I check everything is going well internally. And I'm not a lawyer because I didn't take the bar exam, which
Okay.
in the end is a good thing because when you are a lawyer, you can only practice in the jurisdiction for which you are qualified.
Ah,
And since I
yeah.
specialize in such a niche, so food
Uh-huh.
law is already a niche, but alternative protein is the niche of a niche.
Yeah.
It's all about interpretation. And
Okay.
also when companies they are looking for new markets, whether or not the processes they have already in place need to be reviewed
Mhm.
or improved if they want to fill for regulatory approval elsewhere.
Mhm. Okay. Wow. Interesting. So vegan food law, right?
Hmm.
What defines then vegan food law? I mean, if you say alternative proteins, I mean, I think there's a lot we can talk about and should. We can talk about in the area of like regulation around this. I think like Italy, for example, is, now they're even reevaluating some of these very strict positions they took, I think. But
Hmm.
when you define like vegan food law, why vegan? Does that also encompass like what vegan claims can be, or why is that important to you, or is it just the area that you focused on because that's what you found your niche in, shall we say? So.
So for me, so I named my company Vegan Food Law because I'm a vegan and I
Mm,
practice food law. And
mm,
there is a lot of things to do in this field in the sense that most of the time people will equal a vegan with plant-based, which is not
mm,
necessarily the case. Like I would argue that it's like fairer to view like veganism as almost like a kind of like a religion, or like it's all about ethics.
mm,
We look at how the product is produced from A to Z, So in the sense that it's not because it's plant-based that it's automatically vegan, because you also have to take into account whether or not the product has involved animals, and especially animal testing. And also if you have a human rights violation in the supply chain, you have to make sure that everything was done according to the idea of veganism. And veganism was defined just after the Second World War by the Vegan Society of the UK. And you have several organizations in the world that also do the certification, but they have like slight differences. And for me, it's important that we have like a common definition, and then we can expand on this. You actually have the same. It's the same like scenario in for halal and kosher certification, in
Sure.
the sense that
Yeah.
we have differences between certification bodies.
Mhm.
And it's better in that sense, like if it's like tied to a specific group, to have it defined by the private sector.
Mhm.
So vegan organizations instead of the state or like the industry, because sometimes there is a mismatch. And having work in-house and also working with companies, sometimes they don't really know what the term like entails. And
Mhm.
I'm all about doing education. And most of the alternative protein, they can be considered vegan as well. There is
Mhm.
a big question mark, for instance, for cell-based meat,
Mhm.
because even though you don't rely on the exploitation of the animals to produce the meats, you still have to question how the cells were harvested.
I think you require these cells, but more or less from an animal in many cases. Yeah. So
Uh,
yeah.
but some
Yeah.
people they argue that the cells, if like you want to certify like a cell-based burger vegan, you should maybe take harvest the cell on a dead animal, or like in a way that is not painful for the
Uh-huh.
animal.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, I don't think it's like the way forward to have cell-based meat certified as vegan, because vegan people that identify with as vegans, they are not consuming meat products anyway. And
Yeah.
even though because cell-based meat is the same as meat, like the end product is the same, tastes the same, look the same, the nutritional is also the same. These people they have been eating plants for a long time, and they don't
Mm.
miss the taste of meat. Cell-based meat is something that is more tailored towards people that are flexitarian. So they're most of the time these people are categorized as the ones that eat meat or fish or eggs 30% of the time.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that outcome is like you don't have to be defined as vegan as a product in order to, but okay, so are there multiple competing sort of bodies to define what is veganism? The example you just made, it made me think of something like a vegan hand lotion, right? Where you have not used animal testing, and that could be a requirement for the certification. So are there multiple bodies out there that are competing for being the standard of certification, and therefore like they might approach a brand and say, look, you're claiming veganism, but you actually shouldn't be doing that but they don't have any legal authority to shut down that brand, do they? Of course,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so is there a competition out there for, whose certification people are going to use in different parts of the world, and how does that work?
Yes, it's like so whether or not like the certification is registered as a trademark
Mm,
and where
yeah. Okay.
that's the main defining factor. And you're right, there is a competition between certification bodies, and I would say that I'm not going to name them, but I know that some of them they are more strict than others, in the sense that sometimes they will go on site and then check the factory. They will perform an audit,
Mhm.
whereas other ones they would just ask you to fill up a form, and if they have like further question, then they may decide to visit the factory, or simply decide not to certify you as a brand or like your product.
All right. So similar to maybe like in our industry in digital, like ISO certifications, you can choose to get them. it doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't have it that you're not secure. It just means that it is a certification you have to maintain, and this can be valuable to the holder of that certification, of course.
Exactly. And you
Yeah.
only have two jurisdictions in the world right now that have a legal definition of
Hmm.
vegan. It's India
Hmm.
and Argentina. And there you need, even though you may have the certification from a third party, when you are importing the product, you need to check with authorities if you comply with the definition. So
Hmm.
you can still keep the quality of seal,
Hmm.
um, but you will need to comply with local regulations
Hmm.
because otherwise it would be just misleading. If you are claiming to be suitable for vegan, like your product is suitable for vegan, uh, but at the same time doesn't comply with the national definition, then yeah, that's not the best from a marketing point of view.
Sure. Well, then you get shut down or you can't import. It's that India, it does not surprise me. Argentina is a surprising country to have a definition of veganism, actually, given that it's a huge meat producer, right?
Yeah, yeah, you can be
So
surprised sometimes. Yeah.
interesting. Okay. So then what do you think are the sort of opportunities for businesses to pursue having vegan products, and really in the end, what is the role that you think that the certifications or markers like this can play in environmental sustainability and, forward-looking, more or less solving some of the problems that we all think are out there today? I do think it's critical that we find levers of value, right? Like, why should someone, eat vegan? Why should companies be more, thoughtful about their supply chains? I think that it's very clear that it's difficult to incentivize companies to do this because it's expensive. Veganism, sustainability, et cetera. I think that there's a lot of evidence out there for that. And this is where a lot of these carbon credit trading and things like this, these mechanisms come in. So what do you view as the sort of the positive momentum and opportunities for brands to pursue this, and where it can contribute? Mm.
So in terms, not necessarily in terms of market, but in terms of time, I don't know if you have ever heard about the Veganuary campaign. Uh,
No.
it's
Oh.
a monthly a pledge for January only,
Mhm.
where people they will try to eat vegan for a full month.
Mhm.
And it was started by a charity in the UK, and it has expanded in other places of the world. So in Europe, the big markets are the UK, Germany. Um, like smaller markets are like Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. And also in the US, recently, I think it has been announced that it would be launched in Chile.
Okay.
Um, and it's just to help people, um, to get some information about what kind of products can be certified vegan.
Mhm.
Veganuary doesn't certify products, but they partner with the Vegan Society of the UK that can certify products. And they also veganism is not only for food; it's also so you said it for like beauty care, for instance.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in terms of sustainability, there is often like a short cut that is made, but vegan doesn't necessarily mean sustainable because you can
Mhm.
have chocolate coming from the other side of the world that can be um, viewed as sustainable. But if you have like a local alternative that is produced like emitting far less greenhouse gas emissions,
Mhm.
then you can debate about this. And the sustainable the claim sustainable is also a bit difficult to define in our industry, like in the food industry, because there is no legal definition
Mhm.
whatsoever. We just
Right.
have a definition from the UN back, like that dates back from the 70s. And
Mhm.
it's all about making sure that the resources that we are using today, they are not putting in danger the resources of the population as a whole, and
Mhm.
also the resources left for future generations. And you
Mhm.
have some jurisdictions that have taken initiatives, like for instance, the European Commission is currently working on a project to define and to regulate sustainable claims. So everything ranging from um, emits like, I don't know, 70% less carbon emissions than milk, and you will compare like almond milk with milk,
Hmm.
carbon neutral claims, carbon compensated, because these carbon claims, most of the time, they are based on ISO standards. But
Hmm.
ISO standards, they are not laws. They are
Hmm.
just private standards that companies and a certain industry may decide to use.
Hmm.
But it doesn't mean that if there is some accusation about misleading consumer, that it can be used as a waiver. Uh, so.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And so, I mean, so do you think that this is going to become more of a government and regulatory driven topic as meat alternatives come more and more into the fore? I mean, which I really believe is going to happen. I mean, I think if you look at the environmental impact, as you say, of producing animal products and consuming animal products, it's there. I consume animal products. I don't consume that much of them. Also because of health reasons. I think it's just in general. I also live in Switzerland where the cows I see are happy, right? Like I don't really eat a lot of meat, but I do like cheese, right? But I think that like in this is going to just continue to become more and more of a part of our food mix, right? Like people need nourishment, people need calories, people need protein. And so as these products become more sophisticated, they will become more and more into the overall food stream. And we work with a lot of big food companies, some of which have protein, alternative protein divisions. And you can see they take it slowly, but they don't stop, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like for them, it's like another category. Like ADM, I'm sure is like your former employer is fueling this. My wife works for Givaudan actually in the same sector, the
Okay.
alternative space. And it's like it's coming slow but sure. People change their consumption habits slowly, but as we get them into the shelf and as they become on price parity, you will have companies that make a business out of doing this, and then it will grow, right? And I think then this brings in a lot of interesting questions around how does government protect the existing food supply chain, like perhaps what you see in Italy, you know, that's linked a lot to the agrarian economy, I would presume. Like they want to protect farmers, but I mean, they can't do that forever. Still, you can't just have people losing their jobs overnight, particularly in these kind of key areas which feed the population. So I think that there's a lot of regulatory requirement here, which perhaps the entrepreneurs don't love, right? Like
Mhm.
I do think that regulation is critical. Just like every other big change, I think it's critical in cryptocurrency. But regulation always takes a long time, and regulators usually end up being the least informed and the least capable of everyone in any industry. So, what do you think is kind of the roadmap for that going forward? Like, what do you think is a good model, and what do you think is likely to happen or is happening, right? In terms of regulation, government getting involved, making good decision or bad decisions, right?
Mhm. I
Yeah.
think first it's important to acknowledge that if we don't have a common definition,
Mm.
uh, then it's not really good for business overall because we need to establish a fair level playing field. Um, you when you let like new players entering industry, it doesn't mean that the one that have been established for a long time they're gonna disappear overnight.
Mm.
But you also have to be mindful that if they have like prerogatives and rights, you cannot take them away from them that easily.
Mhm.
So this is why you have some countries like Italy that is fighting like really hard against alternative proteins because they see it as a threat to
Mhm.
their gastronomy and also like food culture and heritage.
Mhm.
But I have to argue that something new, like coming onto the market, doesn't mean that something old is going to go away. You can have two things coexisting peacefully.
Mhm.
And also with alternative proteins, there is still a lot to do. Like I would say, maybe plant-based meat is like the second generation. You
Mhm.
see companies investing a lot of like R&D to make sure that you have a shorter and shorter ingredient list. So
Mhm.
everything related to clean labeling.
Mhm.
Um, and the fact that, yeah, sometimes when you talk with, like I used to work in Brussels, like I worked 6 months in lobbying. And when you ask regulators, yeah, what is your view on this? Sometimes you feel like they are the least informed, but to remind you, people that are at the top most of the time they are the people with the less technical knowledge,
Yeah.
because everything is done by people like below them.
Yeah.
And one good way also to approach this is like education of both the consumers and also policymakers. That can be done through companies joining forces to set up a trade association, coalition,
Mhm.
or alliance, and just have a discussion with people that are going to rewrite or enact laws.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Um, and then what about the harmonization of those laws? I mean, I think there's a pretty strong effort for like global sustainability and environmental awareness. Whether or not countries follow their pledges and whether or not they're involved in these, of course, is still the question. But that then all of the other items underneath this come into play. Like, do you think that is there already motion towards organizing across commonality in countries and jurisdictions and things like this in this area?
So the way it works is at the global level for food law, we have like a set of like common rules that are written in standards and guidelines of the Codex Alimentarius.
Mm,
And actually, last year, the Codex Alimentarius Commission launched an initiative to assess whether or not the standards or guidelines that are applicable to new sources of food
mm,
are still
mm,
suitable for this type of food. And if not, that there is a need to rewrite them or to make sure that, they have to be more detailed, because the main challenge for new sources of food is in comparison to more established sources of food,
mm,
is that the latest they benefit from standards or like a long history of production and consumption. So we
mm,
know which parameter from a food safety point of view you need to check, how you need to like use it. For instance, so when you are cooking in certain recipe, how it needs to be stored, like how much it should be taxed and so on. Um, but before doing international harmonization, something easier and quicker can be done. It's regional harmonization.
mm,
So for the European Union, since it's a single market, it's easier because like laws, they apply across the territories of like the 27 member states. And
mm,
then you have some matters where member states alone, they can decide to enact certain rules. And
mm,
for Italy, it's because cell-based meat has not been authorized yet. You don't have any company that filed for regulatory approval yet.
mm,
So they just wanted to prevent like cell-based meat to be sold in the event it will be approved super fast, which is not happening anytime soon. From the moment a company is going to file for approval, I think we will need to wait at least 3 years.
mm,
And it's funny because France actually has a climate change law that was enacted 2 years ago, and in it they wrote that the sales of cell-based meat is actually forbidden.
mm,
And at the European Union, you have mechanism to avoid this kind of measure that would impede on the principle of the free market.
mm,
But it passed because you cannot really ban the sale of a product that is not even there yet.
mm,
And you have other countries that are part of like trade union, like a little bit more à la carte. It's like
mm,
the Singapore with
mm,
the Association of the Southeast Asian Nation.
mm,
In the sense that you may have like agreements between the member states to have mutual recognition of products that have been approved in one jurisdiction,
mm,
and it's going to be a little bit slower. But that's something also that we see happening because they have an interest in easing the way the trade is operating, like functioning in there within the trade union,
mm.
because you can boost economic growth, you can also create new jobs, and overall also improve the state of like food securities of some members.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're going to be busy. to continue. Okay. So, and what about startups? Entrepreneurs that want to get into this space. I'm not very close to veganism or this type of way of living, but you definitely have a lot of um, you know, entrepreneurs who would think that these are really valuable features of products that you could produce for a consumer. And we run into them quite a bit in our business, as doing research and developing software for young companies, is that, you know, the founders view this as something that should be important and they believe they can make a market out of it. Um, do you think that this is a really big growing market that's just booming, like not just plant-based and meat alternatives, but generally vegan products, vegan alternatives? I think I would have no problem consuming a product or using a wellness product that was vegan. I would like to do that if it's a great alternative what I already use. To be honest, I don't really pay that much attention to it, particularly in things like lotions or toothpastes. But do you believe that this is a growing market, and are you seeing more awareness and consumers willing to switch and change and all of that type of thing? Do you think it's a real opportunity area or growing opportunity area?
I think it's a really like growing opportunity area because people are more and more conscious about the impact of food
Mm-hmm.
on the overall health of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Because so I'm 28. When I was at school, we never talked about the impact of the food system on our planet. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
time, when we were talking about pollution, it was I don't think it's a good idea to fly that often, or like if you can walk or take the bus, it's better than just driving.
Mm-hmm.
But I think kids at school now they are being more and more becoming more and more aware that food is not really a personal choice in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that it impacts like people around you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in terms of how you can make a product better than the one they are trying to emulate, like from a market perspective, it's like to make sure that you can find alternatives to food additives, for instance,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
because for these alternative products, you can put the emphasis on many different parameters, so texture, taste, color, nutrition, and for that, it's like quite challenging to come up with a short ingredient list.
Mm-hmm.
And for instance, in Switzerland, you have a company called Planted,
Oh,
and
sure. Yeah.
they claim to be a company that is doing clean labeling because they have a short ingredient list. They don't have
They
food
don't. They
additives.
claim to not use any additives or flavors. I mean, they do. We eat their products sometime, and I know the company that uh, they claim to do like marinades and other ways. They're in a very nice category for that because I think to produce, pork and chicken alternatives is easier from this perspective. It's less complicated than a red meat alternative. But yeah, I think that this is a nice claim. Certainly in Switzerland. I mean, I live in the market. People like that. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. So, yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying so.
No, like in the sense that you will see like more companies that are doing the same thing as Planted, striving for like a shorter ingredient list,
Yep.
and also to kind of like question the debates that processed food versus like natural one. And
Hmm.
you have very few jurisdictions in the world that have a definition of natural, but basically, like if you look at the literature, if you even like just cut vegetables, it would be already considered as a form of processing
Hmm.
without even cooking the vegetables.
Yep.
Um, and processing is not a bad thing because you have so many things that we can eat thanks to processing, like for instance, olive oil.
Yep.
Like milk is not really a natural product because you have so many steps that need to be performed to make sure that the milk is safe. You cannot
Hmm.
simply, I mean, in many parts of the world, just like milk a cow and hoping that you won't get sick or the milk could be like
Yeah. I
stored
mean,
for a longer.
yeah,
Yeah,
homogenization I mean, and pasteurization. These are all processing aspects which make it safe to
yeah.
consume these. Yeah. Okay.
But I do agree that
Yeah.
the market maybe was a little bit like overhyped at the beginning of the pandemic, and now like consumers they realize that maybe some products that claim to be so great are not really that great. But you see like different trends like around the world. I think in the US, like the plant-based meat category has declined so much because you had an influx of a lot of products last year and 2 years ago. Most of them weren't really that good, and then they have been pushed away. And some people they claim, oh, like if these companies cannot stay on the market, it means that the whole market is to be questioned. It's like no, like when the market is becoming saturated, only the strongest and the best products are going to stay on the shelves.
Well, as an American, that we are very good at overhyping things and then leaving them behind when it doesn't satisfy us. So yeah, this is this is why you have big peaks and troughs in America.
Uh, that
Europeans are a little bit more even keeled. You just don't see as much volatility. But yeah, I agree with you about all that. Yeah. I mean, we do a lot of work with large food companies testing their core products and like for competitiveness and things. And it's pretty clear that like if to differentiate a product on taste, texture, nutrition, it's difficult because more private label brands come in. It's just hard to differentiate. On some level, how do you make a particular thing more appealing? Of course, there's lots of appealing attributes or lack of appealing attributes of any product, but to be able to make a great tasting product that people really like, but is much more sustainable or has these, potentially is a vegan certified product, but still delivers on all of those other elements of the experience. That's a form of differentiation, which also drives commercial interest in doing that, because differentiating on the other kind of standard ways of differentiating like taste, texture, price, etc., is becoming harder and harder because there's just a lot of players in the market and they're all quite similar actually, right? So I think that's another aspect of this is just companies will pick up on like how can I be different in order to try to get out in front, and if this is something that people are valuing, that'll push all the more interest in R&D and making that happen.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I worked also with some private investors.
Mm,
And now they told me that they're a little bit more picky in the sense like in which companies they're gonna invest
mm,
because they want something that is like out of the box.
yep.
It's not simply enough to be plant-based or to be an alternative protein company nowadays. You
Mm,
have to stand out by the way you source your ingredients, how your brand is like positioning, what is the brand message behind it, like what do you stand for? Like you see more and more companies like also being certified B Corp,
mm,
which is like a private standard to showcase that you do good, like basically that we have like certain parameters in place in your company to make sure that you have the full control on your supply chain, that you contribute to managing resources in a sustainable way. Um, so all
is
this thing that companies or investors they may have thought was just like accessory is like
yeah,
becoming a differentiator like a marker
yep.
that now it's like almost a must to have.
Yeah, I mean, you have to maintain a competitive advantage of difference. Is B Corporation also available to companies outside the United States? I mean, I was aware of its designation for US companies, but is this also available to companies incorporated in other
Yes,
jurisdictions? Yeah.
yes, it's
Okay.
I would say like it's like the same functioning as a trademark,
Okay.
where the company where the trademark is registered.
Uh-huh.
And but the cutoff practice or all the requirements that you have to comply with can be like the list can be very extensive, and you have
Uh-huh.
actually people that are doing like as a job like certification of companies that want to become B Corp certified.
Are you aware of any countries that provide like tax incentives or things like this for being B Corp? Like in the United States, you can be a C Corp or or a nonprofit.
Hmm.
And if you're a nonprofit, you actually don't pay tax, corporate tax. But if you have a different ownership structure, I was under the impression, I could be totally wrong, that B Corp was somehow incentivized like this in the United States.
I'm not aware of this because B
Yeah.
Corp is like a private entity.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and I think you can like apply for tax benefits or claim like tax incentives if you are doing something that the local jurisdiction would like more company to do, like for instance,
Mm,
like recycling.
Yeah.
using certain type of materials, like sourcing them like in certain parts of the world instead of in others.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, I basically it's probably it sounds like there's just correlations between the activities of those companies and other things that are generally just giving you benefit in the eyes of your government. Um, it's interesting. And so what do you think, for roles like yours in the future? Of course, you're bullish on providing more and more of these types of services. Do you believe that large law firms will get more into having this type of practice available? You must work with lawyers in specific countries, because if I'm like if I were a company looking to get certified and put my product in the shelf and I wanted to make sure all these things were correct, I'd get experts, but then you also need the lawyers that can go in front of a judge and argue something, of course, right?
mhm.
So, yeah. Uh,
Um, Most of the law firms that are practicing food law, they will
yeah.
do like product law. So like
Mm,
ranging from like drugs, like medicinal, like devices, fast moving consumer goods. But you have maybe like you have like associations of like food lawyers.
mm,
Uh, like they have like members in 20 countries,
mm,
but it will gain momentum because food is becoming something that people are paying more attention to.
mm,
And you have like a bunch of laws or like reforms that are coming in the upcoming years related to sustainable development goals, sustainability, impact, supply chain management. So that something is going to grow.
mm,
And when I started, like I started this and I was a bit overwhelmed at first because I didn't know anyone that was doing the same thing that I was doing.
mm,
Uh, but I do have like my network of like consultant lawyers, but funny enough, we don't do exactly the same thing because
mm,
food law is a niche and some of us we focus more on certain matters.
mm,
I work with a regulatory consultant that has a background in veterinarian studies, and
mm,
she's very good for everything related to toxicology, like data to make sure that, for instance, when you produce like cell-based meat, that you have all the parameters in check. But if you ask her anything related to food labeling, that's something that she doesn't really have an interest in dealing with, or she actually wasn't trained on this.
mm,
So that's something that she will refer to me. And if I need someone to check whether or not the production process is like from a food safety point of view, like good enough for cell-based meat, then I would just like send my clients to her.
okay. Yeah, of course, networking is critical.
Mm.
One question I have maybe as we wrap up here that I did not ask in the beginning, but when you mentioned that you had gotten interested in this, when you became a vegan, 2015, I think was the year that you mentioned, but that this was not a topic, right? And it's true, it wasn't. Where was the information that you were educating yourself with coming from in that case with respect to the impact on the environment of, food production and the food supply chain?
I read a lot at that time. I think you had books coming out like the China studies
Mm,
study, uh, plants over like forks over knife.
mm,
Also, you have like documentaries that I think was about to be released, like The Game Changer with like plant-based athletes.
mm,
So I spent a lot of time educating myself. So I read a lot of books. I did my research. I also did not change my diet overnight.
mm,
I came across the word of veganism in 2015, but I decided to completely change my diet only 5 years later. And
mm.
I think like the first time I really heard about like cell-based meat being a thing, being authorized, it was in Singapore in 2020.
Sure.
Uh,
Not that
so
long ago. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and at the end of 2020, and this is when I knew that I would start working for ADM. So I think in that sense, I was at the right place at the right time. And then I became an independent food law consultant late 2022.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, I think it's really just been an explosion of this type of information since, I mean, for me, it's since I started FlavorWiki, which also coincided with the purchase of Whole Foods by Amazon, right? So this is like the e-commerce kind of engine behind eating healthy or eating more conscious, which I think is one of the things that Whole Foods, is all about, or you could argue whether or not they're about that anymore, but they used to be. And then also, I think when Beyond Meat went public, this of course drew a lot of interest from the investment space. And that this is, I think it was a year, 18 months after that, just everybody seemed to be a plant-based company, a cellular egg company. There were just so many startups that got funded. And of course, a year ago now, when interest rates went up, all of that funding dried up. So now I think that this is why you're seeing a shakeout and investors be more picky about it, right? But still, the underlying theme, I believe, is sticky, despite what people might be predicting about consumers' interest or lack thereof. I do think it is still a relatively niche product, but once you get large food companies building a business behind it, marketing does a lot of magic, right? So,
Yeah, for sure.
when you put that money behind it, and when they're getting positive ROI out of that marketing, then the change will accelerate for sure, right? Fortunately or unfortunately, the Western world is still driven by the big brands more or less in the food industry, and yeah, and many of these small startups I think will be acquired by those companies over time, and
Yeah.
just like any other change management sort of steps. Yeah, it's
I
interesting. I think it's exciting, right? It's exciting to not like to go from being like all about just like cookies and pasta and chocolate to actual, center of plate type of products that are really competing for consumers' interest, right? That have to be good, and that's what I believe, and what I've seen drives R&D and marketing that have sophistication. When they see that they can win if they have a better product, they really go for it. I don't know whether or not they're really convinced yet that that moment has come. I think that is going to happen, but I think in the first wave, many of these large companies kind of like held back, and they're like, "Well, we'll try it, we'll experiment a bit." But more or less, they probably were proven right that there was still some bumps in the road to happen. Right? So,
Yes, and also I think what really matters for the consumer at the end of the day is the price, the price
yeah,
point.
yeah,
And in the last 2 years, we've all like the dramatic events that we had in the world. You also had like shortages of some like raw materials.
yeah,
Like I think you had a big growth in Canada, so pea protein was hard to find
yeah,
last year, and also last year like sunflower
yeah.
derived ingredients with Ukraine. So also like forces companies to look at what are the local ingredients and what they
Mhm.
can make out of them.
Yeah, and it just also switches their focus, right? Like when their core brands that are making them a lot of money that require sunflower oil, get disrupted because of the supply chain, then all their focus of their staff goes into that, not
Hmm.
into, pushing new products forward. So yeah, I think that's natural, right? Like, they've got to sort their own business and then they can move on with new things. But I mean, it's great to see some startups continuing to persevere, and that's probably where the fastest innovation will still come from, right? Is
Hmm.
small companies.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's been great to learn more about this. I think it's a very fascinating field. It's an area which, if fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of people don't think about too often, because it's in the background, right? Which is perhaps where it belongs for consumers. They just want to have safety and and security in their food. But I do think, as I said before, it's harder and harder to differentiate products, in the mainstream, because it's just not that hard to produce food products anymore, right? And
Hmm.
and the brand and the positioning, as you said, the sustainability, the mission, what you can do that's different but still deliver on the sort of expected aspects of the product experience. This is definitely seeing more attention be paid by companies with real money. And then I think then you see the needle start to move, and more of these products in the shelf and more available, more present. Being in the shelf is key, right?
Hmm.
I mean, certain parts of the consumer base, which you're definitely part of, will seek out products like this. The majority of the consumer base, being a company that does consumer research on our side, they don't, right? They buy what they see in the shelf, and then they're driven by price, as you say, right? So getting there and getting known is key, to
Hmm.
these brands, right? So,
Hmm.
well, great. thank you very much for your time. Hope to see you again in the future, and wish you all the best with your move to Amsterdam coming up. Yeah,
Thank you very much for the invite. It was a pleasure talking to you, and yeah, looking forward to maybe seeing each other in real life.
yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. Take
Thank
care.
you.